Alright, so I am back again with another camera review, or technically a lens review this time. You probably recognize the camera. That's the Canon 7 I reviewed a while back. It's a pretty solid camera for the money. Has some decent features. I haven't had it forever, so I can't speak much on the reliability, but it does seem like they have decent reliability. I mean, it's still kicking around after 50 years or more. And even the light meter works reasonably well. But go watch the last review to find out more about that. I'm here to talk about the lens. And this is a Chinese-made lens, a Light Lens Labs lens. That's a mouthful, or a tongue twister, I guess. And these are basically lenses made in China that are kind of copies of classic Leica lenses. And this is an 8-element 35mm f2. I forget the naming convention that Leica uses, but this one is actually a screw-mount one that is collapsible. You can see it kind of collapses in, and then you gotta figure out how to get it to extend and hold in place. And that is a feature I thought would be kind of neat, and it's actually pretty annoying. You can get the same lens in a rigid barrel for about the same amount of money, and I think it has slightly better ergonomics and possibly better build quality. It's hard to say. You do have kind of the classic Leica lens throw, the little tab thing here, which I always like that. But the one problem is I picked the worst camera to put it on, because the Canon 7 has these three little things that stick out, and those are basically meant to mount a giant 50mm f9.5 lens on that Canon famously made. The problem is you can see it kind of coalesces with the infinity lock notch right there, so I can't actually really hit infinity when I'm using this lens on this camera. So that's the first big complaint I have about it. Honestly, that's probably my biggest complaint about it. The collapsibility is kind of weird. Like you're seeing, usually I don't have a problem. You kind of decollapse it and it sticks out, but for some reason it was acting a little weird there today. But yeah, so that's it at full length, and then you kind of twist it and collapse it, and there it goes. It's a tiny bit smaller. Then you got to pull it out and try to get it in there, and you can see sometimes you have these odd problems where it starts unscrewing itself in the screw mount. Again, this usually is not a problem I've had with the lens, but right now I'm having that problem. I guess I'm holding it kind of awkwardly from the side when normally I have it, up closer to me and the other way around. The other little thing is this little tab. It's a piece that's kind of screwed onto this plate, and it will sometimes, if you're not careful, kind of come unscrewed and just hangs around. It doesn't fall out, but it hangs around, and it's just a little awkward, and you got to kind of screw it back in. I feel like they could have glued that in or something, or made it all one piece, kind of like the TT Artisan's 28mm lens. I think it's all one piece, but I could be mistaken. I would grab it, but it's in a box right now. You also have this metal lens hood that comes with it, and when I say comes with it, I mean it came with mine because I bought it from a particular retailer, but apparently a lot of them do not include this metal lens hood, and you have to pay an extra $40 for it. I don't know why so many companies have got into doing that recently, but I find it annoying. I know Fuji did that with a lot of their stuff, and it's just very odd. I think Leica's done that for a while, and I think it's a bad idea, but a lot of people are doing it now. So you have right here the aperture ring. It did not have any aperture markings for some reason, so I took a silver Sharpie and kind of put a marking on there. I don't know why it didn't include any markings. I assume you're supposed to just put the lens hood on it and use these little screws as sort of a marker, which kind of makes sense, but then again, if you don't have the lens hood, it just makes the camera a little bit less usable. So yeah, I guess that's my breakdown on the overview of the build quality, so to speak. It's pretty good. It has some issues, like I said, like the collapsibility is a bit odd. This little thing right here is not great. But all in all, it has a very smooth focus throw. It's not too long. When you don't have the tab there, it locks in pretty nicely to the infinity focus. The lens hood is a really nice quality, and it has the little screw-on tab or screw-on knob thing that some of the old ones have, but it stays on very well. Very thick, very high quality. Some of them are kind of pieces of tin that feel like you could just bend them or break them, but this is thick and very rigid, and I don't see you really breaking it. Maybe if you dropped it, but if you drop most camera gear, it's going to break it, so I don't know if that really says much. But all in all, I think it's pretty good. It has some issues. I think they should have probably taken more cues from the rigid lens and made sure there was some sort of marker to line up the aperture, maybe a slightly higher quality focusing throw tab right here. And if they'd fix that, I think it would be an incredibly high-quality lens that is 100% worth the money. But as it is, I do feel like it is it's just a tad bit expensive for what you're getting, because a lot of times you'll see these selling for over $1,000, and I think that's a bit too much. Now, I will say the image quality is really nice. I shot it in the Canon with some black and white film and got some pretty good results. I shot it on the Sony A7 digitally with an M-mount converter. got some very nice results. I will say it did seem to vignette a little bit around the corners, but the colors were amazing and rich. It was sharp. It had a really nice depth of field. It wasn't the most dramatic depth of field I've ever seen, but the bokeh was incredibly smooth and it just looked really good. And I really liked it on the Sony. I think, again, I might have kind of preferred the rigid barrel on the Sony, but, you know, that was just me buying this thing just because I thought it was kind of quirky and cute, I guess, and maybe not the best idea. But I got to say, the image quality is pretty much worth the money. It's very nice. There are some odd things. Like I said, I'll pull the box out over here for a second. So this is the lens hood. It came in a separate box that was outside of everything, and then everything else came packaged in this nice sort of display box that's very Leica-esque. And you got some sort of manual I didn't look at. And then you have the an actual lens case, which seems very vintage. And you have all the caps and everything. You've got a metal cap that I think that's an M-mount cap. And then you have another plastic cap that's an M-mount cap and a metal front cap. There is an M-mount converter that came with this lens, but I don't know where it is right now. I guess it's probably still on my Sony. But it did come with a screw mount to M-mount converter, which I thought was kind of nice, but also kind of pointless. You have to wonder, they already make the same lens in M-mount. They make the rigid ones in M-mount and screw mount. And I mean, it's nice they included that, like I said, but I think it would have been better if they included the lens hood with the lens rather than in a screw mount to M-mount converter. That's just my opinion. I don't know exactly what they're thinking and what their business model is with these lenses. They sell these in China, but pretty much the only way to get them in America is to buy through some sort of I think through a third-party internet vendor, usually on eBay or something, is probably the easiest, cheapest way to get it, but I think you can order directly from their website. I don't know if they have an official U.S. vendor or if it's coming direct from China. I really don't know, but I'm pretty sure you can order from their website, but I think prices do get quite a bit higher over their website. Another strange thing to note, and I don't know how true this is, but apparently most of the lenses they make are kind of a limited edition, and they make them in limited quantities. And if you look at mine, you see there's a 058/998. Which I assume means it's the 58th out of 998 lenses they're producing in this collapsible screw mount style, I guess, which isn't a lot when you think about it. It's less than 1,000, so that's numbers almost up there with MS Optics or some little small company. I also don't know why they went with 998 and not 1,000. That seems really odd to me, and I suspect that with some of the M-mount rigid ones, they must have made a couple of thousand of those, and maybe they're not limited edition or something. I have heard rumors, I don't know how true it is, that they use leaded glass, like a pretty traditional type of leaded glass, which hasn't really been used in the photo industry since the late 50s, and somehow they can either make it or they got their hands on a supply. I would assume at this point they have to make their own. So that's kind of an interesting note if you're really into vintage lenses. They're probably one of the only companies making lenses with kind of vintage glass, and again, I don't know its exact origins or exactly how true that is or if they use it on every single lens. But if it's true, it is kind of interesting. I always think leaded glass lenses look really nice, and I don't think they get as much credit as they deserve. But then again, there's not a marking on lenses that say, oh, this is a leaded glass lens. You have to do a lot of research to find it. You just generally kind of know if it's a lens from the 40s or kind of early to mid 50s, it's probably leaded glass. And that happens to be one of my favorite genres of lens, I guess. And saying that, I'm not even 100% sure Nikon and a lot of the Japanese manufacturers used leaded glass. I think they did to a certain extent, but that's a whole other story right there. So you can see some of the photos. I'll have them up on screen just so you can kind of review for yourself. Obviously, the color ones, again, are all going to be from the Sony. The black and white ones are actually shot on this particular camera, this Canon 7, with a Fuji Acros 100 push to 400. I thought the lens produced some nice images. Like I said, nice depth of field, very sharp. Which again, I don't think saying a lens is sharp really means anything. I think that's the most generic, meaningless thing you could say about a lens. It does have a very nice bokeh, but it did seem to have some vignetting that for when it was kind of wide open, and I don't know exactly what aperture I was shooting when I got it kind of vignetted around the corners. I would say it was faster. It might have been f2, but it could have been down to f2.8. And it wasn't horrendous in my opinion. I think if you're looking for a kind of vintage style lens, you're probably not going to be overly concerned with things like vignetting. But then again, some people are. Everybody has their quirks and stuff. Like I was saying, so many people classify lenses just based solely on sharpness. And I think that is Probably one of the most surface level things you can judge about a lens, and I would also say it's probably one of the most meaningless. And I would also argue that it's one of those things where pretty much any lens made after like 1960 is going to be sharp enough. So if you have some lens and you think it's not sharp, it's probably a really terrible, really cheap lens that's really old. And I'd ask at that point, like, why are you shooting with a lens that vintage and old and cheap and expecting to get like super sharp modern results? That's just not going to happen. But again, that's just kind of me ranting about a little thing on the side. I'm trying to talk about this lens. But I've said pretty much all there is to say about it. It's a pretty nice lens. If you want a vintage lens, like if you wanted a 35mm lens to put on like a screw mount Leica, I think this is the perfect lens for you. If you want a really good, fast, modern 35mm lens to do shooting in like low light, just dramatic portrait type work, I think this is an okay option, but I think there are other lenses out there that are probably a little bit better for your money, or will, you know, maybe give you slightly better results at a similar price point or a little higher. Again, these lenses usually run $1,000 or more, which seems kind of expensive and kind of ironic when you consider I have a $100 camera with $1,000 lens on it. That's kind of a strange combo, but you know, that's the way I'd have it. I think that's the way a lot of serious shooters would do it, is, you know, kind of lens over camera. But yeah, I'm just kind of ranting and going about. All in all, I'd say this lens, it's pretty good, but frankly, I don't think it's for most people. I think its price is just a little bit too high for what you're getting. I mean, you look at stuff like the TT Artisan's lens, that was about $300. And that was a 28mm f5.6. And I know people say, well, you know, you've got this lens it's much faster. And it's like, yeah, it's an f2 that's a lot faster than a 5.6. You're right, but it's also a 35mm, so it's narrower. And I feel like, you know, you're always going to see 35mm classic lenses are usually somewhere of at least an f3.5. Usually you'll see f2.8s, f2s. That's not too uncommon. Whereas a classic 28mm lens is, you know, it's not uncommon for them to be an f4 or an f5.6. So I think there is something to be said about the aperture, but not much. I think a 28mm lens is pretty much always going to be slower than a 35, is what I'm trying to say. But again, when you consider that was a $300 lens and this is $1,000 or more, I just don't know if that really works, because I mean, they both have lens hoods that are a very similar quality. Now, granted, when I got the 28mm TT Artisans, it included the lens hood, whereas this one, I got it with this particular camera, or I mean with this particular lens, but I think a lot of places are selling them separately, and I think they're selling them for $40 or more, so just be aware of that. And I do wish they had included it. I would have happily given up the in-mount adapter to have the lens hood, but you know, then again, I don't know if I'll have the lens hood on it all the time and use it all the time, so I guess it's kind of a matter of personal preference. But I do just feel that it would be nicer if they could have a lower price point, or just kind of, if they even had just slightly higher build quality, like especially this focus throw tab, if it had been a little bit more robust, and if the kind of, if there'd been a marker, you know, a nice distinct marker, kind of like you see on Leicas for the aperture, that would have been nice. Another thing is that sometimes it's kind of hard, the aperture and focus ring are kind of together, and it can be a little hard to adjust them. Which again, if you're using kind of a vintage style lens like this, that's probably not going to be your main concern, but if you are looking for a lens that is a fast shooter where you can quickly change the aperture and focus, you probably want to go with the rigid barrel version. I think it's going to be much better for that. And I guess that's kind of my one regret. I think I would have preferred the rigid barrel over this collapsible one. That's just me, but I feel like most people, after playing around with it, would probably make that point of distinction and have that preference. I like this, but it doesn't really fit well on the camera. Again, if I had like a Leica 2 or 3 to put this lens on, I think I would really love it. I think I would need a external viewfinder at that point, but they do make external viewfinders that go along specifically with this lens that are kind of a small, low-profile 35mm. I think it's a 35mm tunnel viewfinder, but again, it would look really good if you could put all that on a classic Leica or something of that nature. Even an older Canon where it just doesn't have these tabs. I mean, that's kind of my fault. The Canon 7 is kind of the oddball in the family. It has weird features it doesn't need to have. It lacks things it should have. So maybe I need to pick up another screw mount camera. I prefer not to. I'm trying to step away from buying lots of photo gear. Maybe if I could trade at some point, I might try to trade this for something else. I do know somebody who has a screw mount. I think it's a Leica 2F they might be looking to get rid of. So that might be an interesting trade-off if I can manage that with something. But I don't really have much more to say about this lens. It's an interesting lens. It's kind of quirky. It does have nice optics, but I think the build quality is a little odd, and some of the choices for distribution this Chinese company made are kind of odd. I can't judge them too much because I don't know exactly what their thing is. I don't think they have an official U.S. distributor, really. I could be wrong, and I don't know if that even really means much in this day and age with internet distribution. I don't really know about the limited editionness of this lens or their entire lineup. I don't really know how true they hold to that or what it really truly means. And I've tried to look into it, and there just isn't a lot of information out there. So if I get more information, maybe I'll do a follow-up. But so far, I do have to say, I've been pretty impressed with all these Chinese lenses. The TT Artisans one was really nice and became like my main shooter for a few months. I have liked this one. I mean, again, I think I would have probably gone with the rigid over this collapsible one, or, at least put it on a different camera. I think this would be really nice on like a Leica 2 or 3. I keep saying that. So hopefully I don't have to go out and spend that kind of money to buy one. But even on an older, like a Canon 6, like a pretty standard Canon 6, I think this would be a great pairing with that body and that lens. But with the Canon 7, it is a little awkward. You have that strange hang up right there. But yeah. I don't know. I kind of like it. Is it worth the money? Probably not. But if you're looking for something weird like this, it kind of stands alone as being kind of a modern, vintage-esque 35mm lens. It's a lot cheaper than any Leica you're going to get. I think it's a much better quality than most of the Fuji stuff that's out there that will try to claim it's the same kind of thing. But, it's not really in its APS format, whereas this is a full-frame lens, obviously. So, I've kind of ranted and rambled about this stuff for long enough. So hopefully you took something away from this video. I guess it's kind of a trend of mine is ranting and rambling about photo gear. But, there you go. I guess that's that. Stay tuned. I'll have some more stuff coming with that project and maybe some other camera or lens reviews at some point in the future. Probably not too soon. But once again, hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment if you have any of these Chinese style lenses. I'd love to know which ones you have, what you think of them, if you think they're worth the money. I'm still kind of split on them, so I'd be interested to know what everybody else thinks. So thanks again for tuning in. I'll be back someday. I don't know when, but I'll be back someday with some more stuff.